Hello, hello, and good morning.
Gabby was a bright soul, a bright light. She was so full of life and had so many plans and had her whole life ahead of her.
A life cut short, just 22 years old, and just a few weeks before Gabby's death. Gabby and Brian Laundrie were pulled over by police in Moab, Utah. Well, now we have audio confirmation that police knew Brian was the aggressor before they even stopped the van. Take a listen to the dispatch recording.
The female who got hit, they both, the male and the female, both got into the van and headed north. Continuing attempt to locate, time lapse of about probably 40 seconds. RP stating a male hit a female domestic. He got into a white Ford Transit van, has a black ladder on the back, Florida plate.
I want to bring in HLN legal analyst Joey Jackson, criminologist and HLN contributor Casey Jordan, clinical and forensic neuropsychologist Judy Ho, retired NYPD Lieutenant Darren Porcher. Good to see you all. Darren, I'll start with you on that. We heard it there. At first, it wasn't clear what officers did hear or didn't. Your reaction to what they did hear?
I think that the officers could have been more progressive in connection with their conversation with Mr. Laundrie and Gabby. Because just because a person calls 911 and says that something happened, that doesn't mean that it did in fact happen. But I think that you're obligated as a police officer to assess and ask the right questions. And based on the video that I've seen, I don't believe that the officers asked the appropriate questions, such as, did Mr. Laundrie strike you in the face? Things to that effect. That's not what I'm gaining from the audio. So in my experience in dealing with domestic disputes, I don't feel that the officers dug deep enough to get to the soul of the root cause of the problem.
Right, because someone who's involved in a domestic dispute, as you know, and Judy, I'll go to you on this, doesn't necessarily act the same when authorities arrive. They can act completely different, as we saw.
Absolutely. And in this case, and as in many other cases where domestic violence disputes are suspected, oftentimes the victim will actually take a lot of responsibility for the report when the authorities show up. They may actually become more passive and they may actually blame themselves for the altercation, and they will refuse oftentimes to move forward, such as stepping up to press charges in any way or to actually levy any kind of real complaint against the person that they love, because people who are in abuse patterns are very confused oftentimes. Part of that is the abuse pattern, the perpetrator letting them know and telling them oftentimes that this is their fault, and saying that if you tell the officer something else, later on something bad could happen to you. And so there could be a number of reasons why Gabby is actually acting like somehow she's more responsible than Brian for the call and the altercation.
And the officers taking their time.
Yeah.
This was 1 hour and 17 minutes on the body cam. This is where an officer here, want to show you, is asking Gabby why she hit Brian. Listen.
When you slapped him those times, were you attempting to cause him physical pain or physical impairment? Was that what you were attempting to do to him?
No.
What were you attempting to do? What was the reason behind the slapping and stuff? What was it you were attempting to accomplish by slapping?
I was trying to get him to stop telling me something.
Well, it doesn't sound to me like she attempted to injure him. It's your call. This is 100% your call.
Casey, this is borderline antagonistic to me. He didn't appear, I watched the whole thing, 1 hour, 17 minutes, to question Brian and say the 911 caller said, you hit her. He's saying, why to Gabby did you hit Brian?
That's my observation completely. Now, we've really suspended judgment until we were certain that law enforcement who responded had all the information that we heard on the 911 phone call. Because sometimes something gets lost in the mix between dispatch relaying all that information to the responding officers. But at no point, these officers know that the caller, who was astute enough to write down the Florida license plate and give it to the 911 operator, They never repeat those allegations to Brian. They never say, listen, someone saw you on the sidewalk slapping Gabby. Did that really happen? Now, I understand that officers want to leave it very open-ended and just say, tell us what's going on here and try to get it from the so-called horse's mouth. But it does seem to be a major misstep that they believe everything Brian says at face value. And at no point do they ask Brian, did you grab her face in your hands when you pushed her? Were you trying to cause her physical harm? They don't ask him that. They just ask Gabby that. And it would have been appropriate to simply report to Brian what the caller said to them and ask him and judge from his reaction whether or not it was potentially true. It just seems that they were buying everything Brian said and focusing on Gabby because she was emotionally distraught and crying.
And Joey, given this new information, does anyone in the Petito family have a case for a lawsuit, or will they base it on what Gabby was saying, almost taking the blame, saying she had OCD, crying, saying she gets in bad moods? Will it go off of that, or do they have a lawsuit against the officers in the near future?
Susan, good to see you. They do not. So as a defense attorney, just to be clear, I butt heads with officers all the time, taking into account for the reports they write, the observations they make, what they do, what they don't do. I'll reset and say this in defense of them in this instance. Officers make discretionary decisions every day. If they make an arrest, we say they're heavy-handed, they shouldn't have done it, they should have given another opportunity. If they don't make an arrest and something happens, we hold them accountable for doing it. The only one that I hold accountable here is the person alleged at this point to have engaged in a horrific act, which we believe to be Gabby's death. Innocent until proven guilty, of course. But if someone is predisposed to either commit a crime or has whatever anger that they have within them, if it doesn't happen at the moment because the police didn't make the arrest, it'll happen at some subsequent time. And so at the end of the day, could the police have, made the arrest? Absolutely. Could they have been more proactive? They could have. Could they have separated the two for long standing while he was in jail? They could have done 100 things. But in their discretion, they handled it how they did. And I think that the fault and the blame for the death involved lies at the hands of the person who committed it, not the police for not effectively making an arrest at that particular time.
So they have the discretion, obviously, to make the decision based on what they see. If there were lawsuits coming, there would be lawsuits at every stop?
Yeah, so what happens, Susan, is a lawsuit has to be predicated upon, something other than what a police officer's discretion is. As my friend Darren Porcher can tell you better than anyone on the panel from having been out on the streets every day, the bottom line is that police officers have a vast amount of discretion with respect to what they do and with respect to what they don't do. And it is well within their discretion to make an arrest. They could have done a number of things here. They opted not to do it. But I'm hard-pressed, as much as I butt head with police every single day, cross-examining for their reports, saying they didn't observe what they observed, indicating they could have done a better job. Here, they did what they did. And what they did is they opted not to pursue this arrest, and I think that was well within their discretion, and a lawsuit does not lie for what they did here.
Therein lies the argument for maybe a social worker joining them on calls like this. Gabby Petito's story has galvanized interest and shined a brighter light on underserved missing boys and girls in this country. While we obviously can't highlight every case, we do believe their cases are just as important. Throughout the evening, we'll be sharing their pictures and ways you can help find them. This is Daniel Robinson from Arizona. The 24-year-old geologist went missing outside of Buckeye 3 months ago. His family moved to Arizona to be closer to the search. Today, his mom said this, quote, "You see a man, I see a baby that I rocked when he cried." We're back in a moment.